wife who's joined in for support. Look at that. I knew I shouldn't have told her.
All right, so welcome everyone, both in-house and in the land of Zoom. We'll be getting started in a little bit. But first, we have some cool announcements from my good friend, Jose Castillo.
Thank you guys so much. First of all, hello, everybody out there. Hello, everybody in person. Thank you guys so much. Put on my cool Star Wars mask. I don't know, feel like the force is with me when I wear this one. My name is Jose Castillo, board member for FoundersForge. And just a quick update, we have an amazing event coming up on May 8th. And this is something we've been talking about for a long time. On our list, when we first relaunched FoundersForge last year in February, right at the beginning of the pandemic, one of our big ideas was, how do we bring people together with the format of pitches and pints from the past, but also take that to the next level, do something bigger, do something better. And so, yes, May 6th, sorry, May 6th. This is why I have help. Thank you, Emma Kate. So May 6th, we said, what can we do this bigger and better and take this to the next level? So we said, with COVID, what about if we took over an actual pitcher's mound and had people pitch from a pitcher's mound? So we have Pitchers and Pitches, which is coming up May 6th at the TVA Credit Union Ballpark, home of the new Johnson City Go Boys. And we're going to have a limited number of folks that are going to be able to pitch their idea in front of a crowd at a baseball stadium. So it's going to be a really cool event. We're taking applications right now. Go to My Founders Forge. Anybody can apply. We're going to hand select a few people to be part of that pitch. We're going to have cash prize. We're going to have some speakers, other fun things to make this event more than just about the pitchers. But if you've got a great idea and you want to pitch it to somebody, go to myfoundersforge.com. We're accepting applications until the 15th, correct? So please be a part of that. This is a super fun event, and this is going to be an opportunity for us to do it safe, physically distanced outside, but still bring two people together and get this wheel rolling again. We're ready to go. And I know people are ready to go. So how can we do that safely and in a fun way? Pitchers and pitches. So we'll see you there. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Anything else I missed? Oh, yes, Grace. Hey, everybody say hello to Grace. Grace.
Hi, Grace.
Congratulations. Grace is our new intern with FoundersForge. She's going to be helping us out not only with social media events, etc. But Grace, give us your 30-second pitch just about who you are and why you're excited about being a part of the team.
Okay. Thank you for putting me on the spot. My name is Grace Lockhart. I'm a junior at East Tennessee State University, and I am just super excited to be a part of this team, be able to be here with everyone, and just be able to expand what I know about myself and what I know about the business world, be able to just see more what it can provide for me.
Excellent. You're going to do great. That was an on-the-spot pitch. So you're going to finish.
Thank you. Thank you for that on-the-spot thing.
That's part of the startup life. So I'm excited about the topic today. If you guys have any other questions, reach out to us, myfoundersforge.com, and please go hit us up on social media. If you're not already following us, we're at myfoundersforge on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest. Are we on Pinterest yet? So give us a follow. Thank you guys so much. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Well, hey, super happy to see everyone today. I am very excited about the subject that we'll be covering. You know, every entrepreneur, in one way or another, we have an exit plan whenever we're starting organizations. And that's something I feel like we don't talk about enough, which gave me the idea to bring my good friend here, Chad Sorrell, to talk about mergers and acquisitions and just some good practical tips on things you should keep in mind. And I think you're the perfect person to speak on this, and I'm definitely very excited about this. So please, if you could just, tell us a bit about yourself and then just go right into the presentation. And once it's done, we'll also open this up for Q&A. So if you have any questions about anything, we always just love this to be a conversation. So And welcome to everyone who's following us on Zoom as well. This is very exciting. So, hey, Chad, please tell us a bit about yourself and
All right.
just take it from here.
Perfect. Thanks, Ro. Appreciate it. All right. Well, it's good to be with you guys today. I love talking about anything business, which probably a lot of you guys can relate to. And so the topic of M&A, while a lot of people in my life probably would not want to talk about that, not a fun conversation, I'm hoping that this is a friendly audience that will find it enjoyable. Ro is very generous. I wouldn't say I'm the perfect person to have this conversation with you guys, but I have some experience in terms of been there, done that. And so I am excited to talk with you guys just about my experience personally, and then some I've had since then, and just consulting and talking with other entrepreneurs that are also weighing out this kind of opportunity with their business. But yeah, a little bit of quick background, and real quick reminder, how much time do I have to talk?
I would say as long as we have about 10 minutes at the end.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what time is it now? Is there a clock somewhere?
Well, 9.
Okay, good deal. So yeah, I'll just watch it. You can kind of give me, hey, 5 more minutes. Let's wrap it up. All right. So I don't have a clock in front of me, guys, and I could just start talking and not be watching the time. But so a little bit of background. I came up to ETSU back in '98, and then graduated in '03, and came right out and actually got involved with the industry that I started my business in. It was actually an idea of my grandfather, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, to be honest with you. However, nobody was just offering me these fantastic job opportunities, and I was doing some interviews. I think the last one I gave up hope with was Wells Fargo. And so I decided to check out the records and information management industry, what I eventually got involved with. So long story short, I ended up kind of seeing the light that there was some interesting opportunity with that industry, and decided to come back up to East Tennessee to start it. Felt like this was a better market than my hometown, which is closer to Nashville, but not in Nashville, much smaller rural town, about 6,000 people. There's not a lot of businesses that can survive there except for gas stations and Walmarts. And so I moved back up here and got started. Had to do a small acquisition in the beginning. I didn't really want to start from zero. And we found that there were a couple of people that were involved in the industry here on a small scale. And thankfully, we approached both of them. One of them agreed to terms, and we were able to purchase it, purchase that business. And that's how I got started. So I had a few customers as I was kind of beginning to try to go out and find more. And so that was kind of how the journey started. I did that for 12 years before I eventually ended up selling that business. During that 12 years, I got very involved in the industry, though. It was an industry that had a really active trade association. Got super involved there. I was at conferences every year, very connected. Eventually, spoke at those events, ended up serving on their board. That was all kind of maybe part of some stuff I'll share with you guys in a little bit that was helpful for me. And it's also how I ended up, getting acquainted with the companies that I knew would eventually be my potential acquisition targets for selling my business. So that's a little bit of my background and why I ended up, I guess, getting selected to sit up here and share with you guys today and have this privilege. So with that being said, let's kind of jump into maybe hear hopefully some stuff that you guys are interested in hearing that you'll be able to take away from this meeting today that'll be valuable to you and where you're at currently with your business, or maybe where you want to go going forward. So let's switch slides, and we'll start with this quote: begin with the end in mind. So quick trivia, who knows where that quote comes from? Anybody? It is Covey. There we go. Sorry, I don't have a prize, but I still wanted to see. Yeah, so begin with the end in mind is from a book that Stephen Covey wrote called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. A lot of you guys may have heard of that. And that's the second habit, begin with the end in mind. Now, he didn't write that specifically with acquisitions in mind. However, I think it's very applicable. If you want to probably set yourself up for the most success in promoting your business eventually for acquisition, it's really helpful to know basically when you want to do it who you're most likely to be able to sell that business to, and what they believe is valuable about what you're doing. And so that's why I have, on here, know your target, which really has a lot to do with the timing and maybe the candidates out there, and then developing a plan. What do they believe is valuable? What do you need to do to take your business from where it is right now to position it so that it's attractive to them? And then you got to execute. And frankly, that's probably the hardest part, because, well, working in the marketplace is challenging. And I don't think I would be telling you guys anything to say that 50% of businesses fail within 5 years and 70% do within 10. So it's challenging. So execution's tough. But to give you a story, I guess, to better illustrate maybe one of the best examples I've ever seen of somebody beginning with the end in mind was a guy, I'll call him Vince, from my previous industry. And before he ever got involved in the records and information management industry, he actually studied it and learned who the players were, learned who was most likely to acquire a company in that space. And so before he got involved, he studied everything about those companies and how they operated, how they did their facilities, how they did their fleets, what software they operated, their processes, procedures, everything. So then once he started his company from the very beginning, he literally pretty much developed a clone of what they were already doing in other markets in the market he decided to start in. So he definitely had his target, and he was able to develop a pretty strategic plan, which is some of us is going to be more of a challenge. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he had a model to work off of to pretty much develop a plan to know how to get there. And so that's what he did. I forget now if it was 7 to 10 years that he ended up having that business, but he literally just grew it into exactly what he knew they had in all these other cities, developed a relationship with them through the trade association that I was referring to. And then eventually, once he was ready and timing was good within the general larger market for acquisitions and multiples, because sometimes those things can go in cycles, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then Vince promoted the business and executed the transaction at a fantastic multiple, probably one of the better ones that anyone in our industry has done in the past 25 years. And of course, he came in and he spoke about that a lot of times. He was a very numbers-oriented guy, super detailed. And so his story was pretty neat for me to watch somebody kind of do something so methodically. But it's also probably the best example I've seen of somebody from the very beginning know exactly where he was going to go, how he was going to get there, and just nailed it in terms of execution. So, but like I said, not as easy for all of us. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk about this process of building value. There's a lot of different ways, obviously, that different companies are going to have to address this. Here's just a few that I dealt with personally in my business and that you may relate to, or that will help you to think of some things within your business that are similar. So contracts is a big one. It was huge for me. And when I'm thinking about contracts and how important they are in terms of building value in your business, it's a lot of the terms in those. Assignability. Can that contract with your customer be assigned to somebody else after a transaction? That's something you want to think about. The liability limitation in your contracts. That's stuff that an acquiring business is going to be concerned about that they might be taking on, especially depending on what kind of industry you're in. Liability was a huge concern in my industry based on the fact that we were storing other companies' property. And some of that property was protected via legislation like HIPAA and Sarbanes-Oxley. And so liability limitation was a huge deal, and it needed to be very effectively addressed in your contracts, or potential acquiring companies wouldn't really want to touch it. And it'd be something you would have to address on your own before you could probably ever go to market, or else you definitely going to get discounted sharply because it was going to have to be addressed by whoever bought your business. And then duration's another thing. Obviously, a month-to-month contract is generally not going to be as valuable if you've got a 3-year term with somebody. And so I recognize, obviously, this doesn't apply to every business, but contracts do apply to a lot of us. And so think about your contracts strategically. What's going to make them more valuable to whoever you have in mind that might potentially be an acquiring company at some point. And then your client list. is really important. And what's the makeup of that? The comment I have here is that bigger is not always better. So the personal example here for me was in this market, I ended up working with both the health systems, Ballad and Mountain States. Well, I'm sorry, Mountain States and Wellmont at the time, now Ballad together. The cool thing about that is when I finally did bring them on as clients, it definitely provided rapid growth. The downside that I didn't really have the foresight to see though there was it also really took up a lot of my bandwidth to do additional development of other customers. So next thing you know, they were a bigger and bigger percentage of my overall business. And you can just see right now that that's actually not very ideal for the majority of your business to be dependent on just a few customers. So you've got to manage that tension. I feel like a lot of companies do as they're developing and growing. You'll kind of want that big client sometimes, but the reality is there's some risk associated with it. So think that through, how you might be able to, manage that tension, because I wouldn't tell someone not to go after it, not to go after the big accounts, but the better diversification you can have of clients, the more clients that you can have, likely, the more valuable that's going to look to a company that's evaluating your business. And then the other thing too to keep in mind with larger clients, somewhat common sense, but it's not necessarily what you think about when you just really excited that you've got this meeting with them and man, this is about to be a reality that I'm finally going to land this account, is that they can also be pretty demanding. They're huge and they generally know that they're a huge entity. And if you're a small business, they generally know you're smaller than them. And so sometimes you'll end up compromising in certain ways with your business and your operation and how you do things to make them happy. But frankly, that may not be what is building the most value in your business, but yet you're having to operate that way to make your really large client happy. So something to keep in mind as you're building clients. Pricing is probably kind of common sense, but really what I'm getting at here is you don't want to basically negotiate pricing with customers to where you're fixed what you can end up charging for the next 10 years. You don't want to limit yourself that way, and you certainly are going to be limiting the value of your company to somebody else if your pricing isn't very flexible. And then competitive, really what I'm getting at from that standpoint is I've certainly seen instances in talking with people where their pricing is pretty high in terms of what the market bears and in terms of the competition. And that can certainly be a liability from a couple of respects, because if you're kind of overcharging at some point, I'm going to be nervous to kind of come in and buy your business, because if some of those clients end up getting called on by your competition and they realize you've been overcharging them, it's going to be hard to retain that business. So some people I think are really proud of how much they've gotten away with charging people. Frankly, that may be a liability for you down the road if you get an exit strategy you're wanting to be able to work out. So you want to keep your price, I think, competitive. And you certainly want to keep it flexible. And then software is one thing that was really relevant for me in my business. That could have to do with a lot of things within your business though. So kind of think about maybe where it relates, but you don't want to just do whatever you can to get by when it comes to software or processes and procedures. If at some point you're hoping to sell to probably a larger company, you want to be using tools that are scalable, that are migratable to maybe something that would-be acquirer is using, or that's interoperable with other software tools that they may be using. So to the extent that you can do things like that with technology tools that you're using, keep those kind of things in mind, and it's going to be less of a headache potentially for somebody that might want to buy your business, and therefore it's likely to help add some value to that purchase price. All right, so we'll move on. And once you've kind of decided what that strategy is in terms of how you're going to build value in your business so that it's attractive to whoever you're desiring to eventually promote that to, you still have to really decide, am I going to sell this thing? How long should I hold it? And should I even consider mergers or acquisitions of other competitors myself before I do that? I worked really hard at one point trying to buy somebody else. I actually looked at a couple of different acquisitions several years into my business, knowing that, if I could grow through acquisition, it's a lot faster than organic growth. And if I could bring that revenue in, it was also going to fetch me a much better multiple with my business eventually. So there's reasons obviously that you want to look at merging or acquiring other businesses. There's reasons why you may be looking at selling. For me personally, again, I was facing some significant changes that were going on in the industry. I was also at an age and stage of life where I had considerations as to making a change then. I knew it would give me a lot of flexibility versus probably trying to change careers at 45 or 50. So I had a lot of considerations, and that's just something, I guess what I'm getting at for anybody that's thinking through this is know what your why is in terms of what you're pursuing, when you're pursuing it, so that you don't regret it later. I've talked to a lot of people who have regretted selling their business, because when someone approaches you and they offer you a big number, which I've had a couple of friends in the past year, because it's pretty hot. M&A activity has been hot for a year or two now. Money's cheap. And they've been offered big numbers, and we've had conversations about whether or not they should sell. And so we get to talking through that. And thankfully they were willing to kind of sit down and talk to some folks, which I think kind of got a little bit of that lustfulness out of their eyes at the big numbers that were being thrown at them, to help them realize, hey, I do like my business. I don't know what else I would go do next. I don't know that I could create something this successful again. And if I just ride this out for 5 or 6 years, I'll make as much money as they're paying me. So, you kind of want to consider all of those things in terms of industry uncertainty. Like I just said, opportunity, burnout, new passion, all those things are going to come your way at some point. So just weigh them out thoughtfully and have people that you talk to. Don't do something like this impulsively, because it's something you can't really unwind once you do it. And then, growth having consequences. I've had some interesting conversations with people that said, I'm happy where I am at this size. Bigger isn't always better in terms of growth either, because it's likely to result in lifestyle changes for you sometimes when you grow. And so think about that before you necessarily just grow for the sake of growth, because everybody just is doing it around you. So I've had some neat people share their stories there about why they stayed where they were. And starting over isn't easy. I don't want to reiterate that one too much. Obviously, like I said, sometimes it's hard to create a successful business. And so don't sell something that's working great for you if you're enjoying it just because someone's offering you a good number. It might be hard to create something like that again that you really love doing. So, and then know your math, obviously. It isn't just a lifestyle decision or other opportunities. You want to definitely look at your numbers carefully. There are people that can obviously walk through this with you. If you're getting someone that's offering you X amount of money and you're wondering, is it better to take that and invest it over here? And what's the time value of money considerations? There's financial advisors that you can work with that will help you know exactly how to evaluate that and make a good decision. You don't need to be doing math on the back of a napkin or with your buddy trying to decide which is the better deal. So definitely find some good advisors to help on that front if it's something you're getting serious about evaluating. All right, keep going. How are we doing on time, bro? I feel like I'm really taking too much time on some of these slides.
12:36.
All right, so how much longer do you want me to talk? 20 minutes, okay, great. All right, so once you've kind of thought about where you're at in that time horizon of buying, selling, holding, etc. If you have decided that you're getting close to wanting to sell, some other considerations are going to be, all right, the exact timing of moving forward with that. How are you going to price that business? And then how are you going to market it? Is it going to be something that you do yourself, or are you going to outsource that and work with a broker? In my industry, the majority of people used brokers. It was an industry that had acquisition activity regularly going back to really the early to mid 90s. Generally had went in cycles. And so there were established brokers with a lot of experience trading business, selling businesses in that industry. I ended up not using one myself, and I'm not sitting here advocating saying that's the way to go, but it isn't the case that you always have to work with somebody like that. So keep that in mind. The brokers can be a great resource. They have a ton of experience, as it says up there on the slide. They've got great networks. I had some colleagues who, when they did approach brokers about selling their business, they'll come in and take a look at where you're at, and they can offer some fantastic advice and saying you're not ready. They had one of my friends go back for 2 years, and they had them work on a list of things and said, you need to work on these items in your business, because in due diligence, they're going to hammer you on all of these things. And you've got way more value you can get out of this company if you'll go work on these few things before we go to market with it. So you brokers can provide a lot of experience like that. If you've got some that are involved in your particular industry or in something similar. Industry peers are another good option. Like I said, there was enough acquisition activity in the industry that I was in. There were people who had gone before and that I was able to have conversations with. It's a little more anecdotal than talking with somebody like a broker who's done a ton of deals, but it's still valuable. They're going to be generally very authentic and transparent about some parts of the process, maybe that the brokers aren't even familiar with because they're only on one side of the deal. So, you know, if you can talk to people who have been there before and take them out to dinner or lunch or something like that and have a conversation with them, I think it's immensely valuable. And I certainly had a couple of conversations like that with folks who I had known for a number of years and then eventually ended up selling before I did. And then you all heard me say I was super involved in my trade association. I think if you have a trade association and it's even just halfway valuable, I'd say get involved. Mine was tremendous from the education standpoint, but then also the relationships and the networking. So I eventually got involved with the board, and frankly, I was a small player. I had a smaller company compared to what a lot of companies are in that industry because they're in larger markets. The Tri-Cities is a small market for that industry that I was in. And so it kind of raised my profile a bit, just being involved with the board and beginning to speak at conferences and stuff. And frankly, I think that helped kind of put me on the radar as a potential acquisition and probably made it easier for me to be known and to market that business to some of the companies that, you know, did a lot of acquiring in space. And so there's multiple reasons to be involved with the trade association if you guys have one. And then, yeah, competition. I could have done a better job at this locally. When I was telling you I wanted to acquire a couple of different companies over the years with my business, you know, one of them was local here, and you know, I didn't do enough to cultivate and maintain a healthy relationship with my competition. At one point, I'd taken a fairly large customer from them, and that wasn't done in any kind of malicious way. But no one's ever really happy when you end up taking a larger customer from them. I think that never helped that subsequent conversation about, you know, trying to maybe end up buying that business later on down the road. So I guess the takeaway here is to the extent that you can maintain healthy relations with your competition is fantastic. I think one, they may be somebody that you want to try to acquire at some point, but frankly, it's probably one of your easiest opportunities to sell your business at some point too. So competition is not your enemy, is the point there. All right, I think we've got one more slide. Then we do questions, which I like Q&A better anyway. Yeah, so once you have decided who's going to help you market your business, and you decided maybe you're going to do it yourself or you've got a broker hired, and you've got somebody that's giving you a letter of intent and is planning to buy your business, then you still got to get the deal closed. And I'm skipping to my third bullet point, duration. Man, it can be a long process. Mine went really smooth. I mean, truly, there was not any hiccups. And it still took about 5 or 6 months. So it's not like selling a bike on Facebook Marketplace. Not that anyone has that assumption, but it's going to take a minute. And depending on how sophisticated you know, the acquiring company is and how big the transaction is, there may be a lot of diligence that has to be done. And so documentation, I'm kind of working backwards in the order of the slide here, but yeah, someone told me once that the person with the most information wins in any conversation. And certainly with due diligence, that's kind of true to me as well, because so many claims that I had made verbally in conversations, well, you got to prove all those out. And so you want to have really good records. So if you're not keeping good records right now, start doing so, because they may have came in and said they're going to give you $5 million based on some of the verbal communication you all have. But if it's a sophisticated operator, they're going to come in and verify that extensively through your accounting records. They're going to review every client contract that you have, or at least your major ones. They're going to look at rate schedules. They're going to do site visits. They're going to meet with major customers. They're going to verify everything, or at least they did in my case, which is why in that industry that was normal too. It takes several months. So documentation is really important. No one likes record keeping. I did. It made me a lot of money. That was the business I was in. But it's also important for you all as operators. It's not the fun part of what you do, you know, Ro, is making all these cool effects and stuff, but it will help you hit that end target that you have eventually of proving that your business really is performing the way you say it is. You've got the documents to back it up. So, you know, I told a buddy of mine who was talking about selling his company one time, I said, well, why don't you go ahead and send me your past 3 years of P&Ls and balance sheets, and let me take a look at those this afternoon. He's like, well, take me a minute to get those together. I said, you're not ready to sell then. You know, if you can't produce your financials pretty much in an email this afternoon to me, that tells me that you're already probably not paying enough attention just to that one aspect of your business to think you're going to be able to suddenly go and just sell it to somebody. Now, that's a generalization, right? I mean, I tried to do an acquisition of a small self-storage company about 1.5 years ago, and they couldn't produce those financial documents. And I said, well, I at least want to see bank accounts so that I can verify the revenue and expenses that you're purporting to be the case for your business. Well, then they didn't want to produce their bank statements, their bank records. At that point, I don't really know how to verify anything that you're saying about the performance of your business, except I guess I'm just supposed to assume you're just a great person and I need to trust everything you're telling me. And I'm sorry, I can't do that if it's, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on the line. But nonetheless, someone else did. They sold that business and never produced any of those records, and somebody else was willing to buy it. So you might pull a rabbit out of a hat without keeping good records, but I would recommend not taking your chances. And then communication. This is an interesting one. If you're you know, kind of here at the point to where you are going through due diligence, or you know that, you know, you've got somebody that's giving you an offer and you're going to pursue moving forward with it, what do you tell your team? That's a very tough conversation. I'm not saying I have the right answer on that. I'm just going to tell you what my experience was. I went out and sought advice on how to handle that. Thankfully, I did have a small team at the time. I think I was around 8 or 10 team members. And I ended up only telling 2 that really it was very much need to know, because I needed their help in executing all the due diligence requests. And so, but the advice I got, and it proved out to be true, was that because it takes a long time sometimes to walk through a closing process, and there's a lot of questions that are going to be in people's minds. If you bring your team into the loop early on, it's going to probably cause a lot of stress and a lot of questions. They're going to know, when's this going to close? How's this going to affect me? What's going to happen with this? What's going to happen with that? And guess what? You don't even know when it's going to close. You're not in control of that. And frankly, you don't have the answers to all those questions. You know, the company that was buying my business, they gave me indications of what they were going to do, but I couldn't in good faith guarantee it. It's not like I had legal recourse to make them do it necessarily, but they had indicated, hey, we want to keep everybody on. They even told me that they were going to be bumping pay for people and some of the perks. So I knew what was likely to happen, and they did follow through with that. But you can't make those promises though. And so the earlier you bring people in, just know you just signed them on to ride for potentially months of not really knowing when this deal is going to get done. Is it going to fall through? Or probably a lot of other answers to questions that they have about what their experience with that company is going to look like when you no longer own it. So keep that in mind when you decide to bring people in the loop on what you're evaluating, is what I would tell you. And I'll leave that decision up to you guys. And then back to the representation thing. The time to find a good accountant, which hopefully you're already working with if you've got a business, you know, in operation right now, but the time to find a good attorney is well before you have already decided you're selling and someone's approached you, or you've got a letter of intent that you've got in your hands, because then you're going to see who's available, who's got workload capacity right now that can just take on your deal, and you're just going to go with it. You're probably not going to want to go through an evaluation process, maybe meeting with 3 or 4 M&A attorneys, end up selecting somebody that you feel really good about, that you've developed a relationship with. So I would say find good legal representation in advance. If you think, hey, I do want to exit via an acquisition at some point like this, then cultivate that relationship in advance. So, all right. So I've thrown out a lot of stuff, but for all I know, there's questions that I've not even touched on that some of you guys have in here, or maybe on Zoom. So I'm happy to Q&A and answer questions.
I have a question on competition. So like,
And one thing, if you have a question, you could just introduce yourself.
Oh. Edwin Williams, founder and CEO of Hammer, the market office for subcontractors. And my question has to do with your relationships with competition in terms of view them as potential strategic partners, selling or buying. Because like in my space, as of my last count, like last week, there's at least 15 direct competitors that we have, ranging from idea stage to have raised tens of millions of dollars. So how do I reach out and say, hey, I know we're competitors, let's start a conversation that in 2, 3, 5 years may turn into merger acquisition.
Mhm.
Because in the past, when I reached out to some competition where we're in a conference and like, oh, we do the same thing. I'm willing to talk, but then I get ghosted.
Mm.
So how do you broach that?
Yeah.
With the competitor?
Sure. Well, it sounds like you've done a good job of trying. I think the reality is it's just not always going to work. There's a lot of folks that have more of it. Frankly, I think everyone struggles with it to a degree, is that scarcity mindset. There's not enough business for everybody. So we can't talk to anybody that's competing with us. And frankly, I just don't buy into that mindset. But if someone else does, yeah, can't change it. So I'd say one, just don't give up on trying. But two things that come to mind is I would probably end up trying to look for folks that aren't anywhere near kind of my geographic area. If it is, although it sounds like you've got a product that is easy to promote on a national and international level, so almost everyone's going to still feel like they're competing. So that might be harder. But that's where that's the answer for some people in here who don't necessarily compete across state lines or internationally. Maybe you find somebody that's in another market that feels safer talking to you. And in your case, the other thing then might be finding somebody that's closer to your size or a little smaller. And then they may be more likely to talk to you because they may even feel like they can get something from it if you're approaching someone that's maybe a little bit earlier stage than you, or there's someone that's in a comparable stage. That probably would be my next approach if I've got shot down a couple times with people that are ahead of where I'm at. And then maybe then just because they're behind where you're at doesn't mean they still can't bring value in terms of what you all are trying to accomplish experience wise, just from the brainstorming of what you guys are working through at the time. So good question. And not easy to do. I failed at it.
Hey, it's Arnab. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Hey, thank you for that summary. My name's Arnab Chakraborty. I'm Chief Technology Officer and a co-founder of Flow MedTech. And I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to emphasize that documentation point that you made and how super important that is. And I feel like a lot of startups and people that I talk with that are, just getting into this world, they don't realize how valuable that can be for so many different reasons. I come from a little bit of a different industry, medical devices, and it's really important for us from like the FDA regulatory perspective to be able to have traceability in our documents and our medical device designs. And, it's just like being able to, for us, we have all of everybody we've ever talked to, we have those notes documented, how long we spent with all of them. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is when you're getting advice and feedback from people, like, for example, from us, a larger company may have to spend, $1,000 an hour to speak to a physician, whereas because they see us as a small company, they may offer their time for free, but that doesn't mean there isn't a value to that. And when you're trying to sell your company, I feel like having, an account of all that time that you've received from advisors and people, it may end up hundreds of hours, and hundreds of hours at $1,000 an hour ends up adding a lot of value to your company. And the more you can justify all that through your documentation, I think the better it is for you, but also in a liability sense. For us, I guess what we're working on a medical device that, may, hopefully it will never hurt anybody, but if anything ends up happening, people are going to keep trying to sue you, and they're going to keep trying to go back and back to like the person who has created the engineers, the people who have developed this. And if you don't have documentation to be able to prove, you did everything in your power to create something that's going to be as safe and as effective or whatever for the consumer, that's going to hurt you if you don't have that proof. And so for us, like whenever I speak to people, I always try to tell them, to create some sort of document control index or some way to keep a track of all the documents that you'll ever create in your company. And I think that's a super important thing, you know, even to the point like for us, anytime we send out a document to somebody, we have basically what we call contact numbers. And so for us, since we're working on like confidential information, if we share something with somebody and they end up sharing it with someone else and somehow it comes back to the company, we know looking at that document number that it was this person who leaked this information. And so I just think, you know, documentation is so important for any company. And thank you for including that in your presentation, because I feel like people don't talk about that as much.
Yeah, it's not the funnest part of the conversation, but all good contributions there, Arnett. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Valuation. So I've seen in several situations where valuation varies anywhere by 1 to 20% based on who values what, how. How do you handle disagreements where someone's like, well, I don't value this client in the way you value this client, therefore, or this service in the way you value it. Therefore, I'm going to give you this valuation as opposed to another person or you saying it's valued at this because of.
Yeah. Yeah. So the short answer, which sounds kind of sarcastic, I gotta say it anyway, is there is no argument because they're the ones that have the money. And so whatever they decide it's worth to them, that's going to be what they're going to pay. And there's probably nothing you can say at that point to change it, unless there is, like we were just talking about, some kind of discrepancy in documentation that you can then help them understand, no, they're calculating it wrong or they've missed something. But if their valuation approach is different, good luck really changing that, especially if it's somebody that's done a lot of deals. The company that bought mine, they'd probably done 60, 70 acquisitions before they bought my business. There was nothing that I was going to say to them that was going to cause them to value my business any differently. All it was going to do, what I was going to do is show them the information I had, and then they're going to tell me what they were going to pay for it. And then it's up to you to really hopefully have more than one prospective buyer if you can. Because that certainly gives you a little more leverage. But at the end of the day, the short answer to your question is that there's really not anything you can do a lot of times to change unless it's somebody that's doing their first acquisition like your competitor, and then maybe there's a bit more of a negotiation. But it comes back to documentation, I think. The person with the most information is going to end up probably having better leverage in defending what you're trying to convey. So again, documentation. So does that answer the question pretty well for you? Yeah. Okay. That's a frustrating reality when you're like, no, this is worth more. So, yes, sir.
I would have had a ton of questions for you a month or so ago, but I've been in the talks with the company for merger acquisition since the beginning of the year and actually signed the agreement a couple weeks ago. So
There we go.
all my questions kind of tabled.
Hey, that's exciting.
Process, I guess, post.
Mhm.
What's get into like money situations or like what's navigational wise? Any advice on how to make things go as smoothly as possible in regards to, just continuation of business agreements?
Yeah, so right now it sounds like you're still in the due diligence phase. You actually haven't closed, money hasn't changed hands, but you've got that letter of intent and they're working through determining, are we going to pay what we originally said we were going to pay, or are we going to, through this diligence process, show you why we're going to reduce the amount that we originally offered you? So that's something to keep in mind that you probably still is relevant to you. It happens a lot, where a company will come in and they give you that initial number of like, oh, we're going to pay you $5 million for your business. That sounds fantastic. And then you get through the due diligence process about 3 months, and then they tell you, here's why we're only going to do 4 now. You've just spent 3 months on this process. You've got like diligence fatigue, and you planned on selling. At that point, it's really hard not to take 4 million. And so what I would say is, really, gosh, but I hate to almost go back to the documentation thing, but you really want to take this process pretty seriously and make sure that you've got as much evidence as you can to justify everything that you have communicated to them that's caused them to value your business the way they have, so that at some point in this process, they're not docking you certain amounts based on certain things that they're uncovering. That's something I think that is relevant. And maybe you're past that and you don't have any concerns there. If not, that's great. I just know it's something that a lot of businesses have went through, where suddenly an acquiring company starts complaining about certain realities in the business that they say now makes it less valuable. But in terms of just money changing hands, I may be missing some of the nature of your questions and just follow up if that's the case. But I mean, once we got through allowing them to see everything they wanted to see from customer visits, facility site visits, reviewing all our accounting, reviewing our customer contracts, and it was all the way I said it was. They realized I had not lied to them basically. Then it was smooth. They just literally wired me the money. Now there are other considerations that were a part of my deal and could be a part of yours. I also owned the real estate that my business operated in. So I had two entities. I had an operating entity, the business I was selling, and I had my real estate entity. And talking into your accountant, maybe even your attorney gets on that, but definitely your accountant may have opinions as to they're going to continue to want to use that space potentially and lease it from you. And they may be willing, if you would prefer, to get a better deal with your lease terms in exchange for a little bit lower purchase price. I found that companies will help negotiate with you there a little bit. At the end of the day, they know what the max is that they're wanting to spend on this deal. But if they know that a real estate component is going to be involved with the lease, you may be able to, based on consulting with your advisors, determine that it's more advantageous for you to get more money out of this overall transaction via the real estate part of the relationship than the actual price they're paying for your operating entity. And then the other consideration is they may be keeping you on. And I've had an opportunity to stay on in actually two capacities. And so I'm just kind of free flowing here. I don't know how much of any of this will be of value to you, but maybe something will end up sticking out and be of value. It was going to reduce my purchase price a little bit if I stayed on, and we had an agreed upon amount that I would have been paid to stay on, and we also agreed upon the duration of time that would have been contractually obligated to the company. And past that, of course, would have been negotiable. So that could be a variable that can be negotiated in a deal like this: is are you staying on with the company, and how much are they going to pay you, and will that or will that not affect the deal? And then the way I ended up staying involved, though, is I still had time left on the board for the trade association. And so while I didn't stay on working with my operating entity, I wanted a clean break there. I ended up staying on with them as a liaison effectively to the industry, to the trade association. And so I was a communications consultant that they ended up paying, and I finished out my time serving on the board for a year and a half. And so I wanted to finish that commitment to the association and my colleagues there and the board, but it also ended up being financially beneficial as well to do that. And access was good there because now they've got still a seat at the board for the industry influence. So it was good for everyone involved. So those are some things to think about. There are multiple variables that maybe end up determining how you end up, how much money you take from them and what bucket it goes into, so to speak. And then sometimes you will see people say, we'll give you, and actually they did do this too. I did get maybe like 80% of the money up front, and then maybe it was like 20% was payable over a certain amount of time. You can see them do that, kind of have that retainer amount that they'll pay after a certain point to make sure certain performance criteria are met with the deal. Could be customer retention, it could be key employees staying with the company, stuff like that. So sometimes that's not uncommon for them to want to hold back some of that purchase price for certain performance metrics to be hit. So be careful what you commit to there. The company that I bought when I started 12 years ago, we did that. We did a promissory note for probably 25 to 30% of the deal value, and they ended up losing a significant customer. I lost a significant customer. We lost a significant customer during that first year, And so we had a calculation as to how that reduced the overall amount of that promissory note. So that can happen. You could lose somebody. Be careful what you commit to and whatever, amount that they're paying you up front. Is that, so any other questions?
It's not a complete exit strategy, it's more of a merger. I'll be working with them
Yeah,
under branch of their.
that's a big part of the equation and is your compensation and staying with them.
And the goal for, which I'm also fine with, but like the overall goal with them is, in 7 years or so to sell.
Yeah.
And with the agreement and everything in place, what they say, the larger company having a higher beta, larger multiplier.
Yeah.
And all that stuff.
Well, and you see with bigger deals like that too, if it was like a public company, that's where stock options come involved. Sometimes they want to give you a lot of stock options and they want to value that as part of the deal. And that's when you got to determine how much confidence you have in that company and its future. If part of the buyout of your business or the merger is going to be stock that they want to issue to you, and if you're supposed to be getting 2 million and they want 1 million of that to be stock, well, you want to have a lot of confidence in the fact that literally 50% of what you just committed to is based on a lot of other people that you have very limited control over. And that might be fine, right? That's worked out great for a ton of people. Just want to be eyes wide open about the liability of it. So, yes, sir.
Jose Castillo. So it sounds like there's a lot of similarities between a franchising and licensing situation as well as M&A. Have you been on either side of that equation on franchising or licensing, either buying or selling?
Not on franchising and licensing. I have not, sadly. Just can't speak to it. Yeah. Be interested to hear about it, though. You get somebody that comes and speaks about it, I'll come listen.
It sounds like a lot of the same stuff, documentation, like just a lot of the same stuff.
I looked at one business that I thought about getting involved with that was a franchise. And I mean, yeah, you can imagine if they're trying to control a customer experience or product, then it's extremely documented, which I think is good personally. But yeah, be involved.
Sometimes it's something like buy or something just to sell the product. We'd like to hear what everyone's thoughts are on that. Sell your company, even sell the company that will sell the product you created and developed.
How much do you love your product?
Also, too, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm
How
looking
much?
at, yeah, it's like, I'm looking at a 5-year profit revenue goal, where you think you can make more money selling that product over 5 years than if they offer you to shelf that product. If so, don't sell, otherwise sell. Yeah, that would be my conclusion.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I would kind of refer you back to the know your why slide as to why you're doing it. My guy, Vince, I was telling you about in the beginning, obviously he had no passion or love for the records and information management industry. He saw a business model that he could have a clear plan as to how to enter into that, build it, execute on that plan, and then sell it for a great multiple. I mean, honestly, if someone came to me with a good idea of how to develop something and then sell it to somebody else that either would want to shelve it because they didn't want the competition, or that they're just somehow going to integrate it into what they did, I'd be fine with considering that. And so it is all depending on what your personal connection is to the product and where do you have better opportunity. So it's I think it comes down to that. I don't think there's nothing shameful from that perspective, my point of view. So
I have one question. It's like personally, I find acquisitions to be a bit scary, and not as much on the getting acquired, but more on us actually acquiring different companies. And I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is always to mitigate risk, right? And the fact that I've never done that before, it's almost like it's like the first time I do anything is always the hardest, process is always the scariest. And I guess what I'm asking, do you have any things you'd advise to consider that maybe can help appease my mind in certain things? Or do you have any formulas that you kind of track to, some parameters that you work within to doing that? Because I mean, there are definitely options that, I've thought about the different companies in the VFX stock footage world that,
Yeah.
say, hey, if we could get that, we could grow our products by, X amount, but then it's always, it's like the first step is definitely super intimidating for me.
Right.
Like, do you have any thoughts on what can make it less intimidating and help us take that first step?
It's reminding me of a story that I guess I'll share a little bit about it. It doesn't really answer your question well, but maybe it'll be valuable to somebody. I guess I would say just not to be scared of doing an acquisition, because it's easy to put good people in your corner to help you walk through that and evaluate whatever business you're looking at, so you're not doing it alone. And thankfully, it's not permanent people you have to hire and keep forever. It's just maybe an accountant that you have to lose, a few $1,000 to look at a deal. And I'm not just kind of saying that arbitrarily. I get that that's costly, but it may be worth looking at. But for me, there was at one point, the second opportunity I looked at purchasing wasn't in my same market. And so kind of maybe the lesson or the takeaway I had from that was I got pretty excited about it because I just wanted to grow, kind of had that mindset for the moment, got distracted by that. And somewhere in a conversation with somebody, which is a good reason you guys, have FoundersForge. I think it's a great place to really share ideas like this with folks who might end up causing you to think about a potential opportunity in a different way. Was I ended up realizing that there were going to be challenges to doing an acquisition in another market, that were going to probably really take up a lot of bandwidth of my time in integrating that company. And I decided that I had more opportunity to grow in this market, and I was probably better suited to invest my time and resources in growing more here than to try to enter another market. And so but that's just it's like a general lesson that I kind of took away from it. But there might be a similar situation like that for you to consider at some point when you are looking at a particular deal. So it's like trying to look at it from different angles, because it isn't always just about, well, I go buy them and then I automatically grow. No, there's a lot of other consequences, variables that are going to happen when you do that. And so thinking through those and deciding, do I want those to happen, or are they worth it, would be decisions you'll have to make. But that wouldn't keep me from looking. I think really the best thing I'd tell you is at some point, if there's a company that you're interested in acquiring, I'd initiate a conversation with them. Just start it and see where it goes. And that's probably the best thing to get over your fear of swimming. Just step into the shallow end of the pool. You're not going over there and committing to buy them initially. You're not going to give them like, formal LOI to start the process. But yeah, just to have a conversation, see where they're at, and see where it takes you. But have some advisors in mind in advance. Who are you going to go to if suddenly that takes off and goes faster or better than what you think? Know who you're going to call up to help you really take a close look at it. So they'll keep you in the lane so you don't get in the ditch.
Really crazy that was the first thing you did.
It was the first thing. That's right.
Man, that blows my mind.
Yeah, it was. Well, and that's why I guess I'm just saying I get in your mind why it probably feels like a really big step, but especially if you're going to approach a smaller company and then kind of where you're at. I mean, this was a small deal. This guy was. Well, I hate to throw in numbers because I don't want to. It's all relative, right? But yeah, it wasn't even his primary business. That's why he was willing to sell. It was a secondary business for him. But hey, it got me about 40 customers, so I wasn't out there having to convince. Hey, Abraham, will you be my first customer? I know I'm only 23, but I'm going to do a really good job. I promise. I know exactly what I'm doing. At that point, that money was worth its weight in gold, because then I had 30 companies that had reputations and they were established in the region. So I didn't have to pay a lot to get it off of his hands, because frankly, he was excited to take the money and refocus on his primary business. So you never know what's going on in the other people's minds. Just have the conversation, see where it goes. It'll be a great learning experience.
I'm Abraham McIntyre. What was your time frame from when you first acquisition to your last
when I sold. Yeah, it was 12 years. So as Ro was saying, I literally got started with an acquisition. So you bought a business at the very onset. I'd not gone out and tried to recruit one customer. So I went into debt right off the bat. And that's where it helps to have somebody backing you. And I won't get into the weeds unless somebody just wants to hear that story kind of about how I had that arrangement with family. You may have that with an investor. That's something to think through, how you end up orchestrating that deal when you've got somebody like my grandfather that really believed in this and wanted to get it started, but I even had to negotiate with him. And then there came a time when I bought out his interest in it. And so, you know, you want to have all that stuff on paper, is what I would say, even if it's family. It's going to protect your relationship. That's maybe the quick takeaway I would say. There's somebody's wanting to offer you money to help start something, even if it's family, get it all on paper so that everyone has super clear expectations as to how this deal is going to go as it unfolds. And it protects you so that everyone follows through on what they said. But yeah, so we started with an acquisition, and then it was 12 years later before I ended up selling. And I was laughing when you introduced me here earlier, Ro, because I didn't have an exit strategy. I'd never thought that. I did not begin with the end in mind. I didn't do anything of what I just talked about, you know, which is why I was really glad to come over here and talk to you guys about it. I didn't do any of it. And so I learned a lot through that process. And the trade association, all those peers that, you know, I met there were fantastic at helping me begin to develop that strategy and then begin to see, oh, this is where I could go. Oh, I could sell this at some point. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I thought I was going to sell it probably for 3 or 4 or 5 years, that it was even a possibility, just didn't cross my mind. So.
Neil Owen, I have kind of a question on a different tack. So you invested 12 years of your life and growing this company.
Yeah.
And then you go through the due diligence and all that, and working with your account. You're not there on a daily basis anymore. For like the first 6 months, what was life like?
Yeah.
What was it like for you personally?
My wife's still watching over here on Zoom. So that's funny. It's a true story. It's kind of crazy. We had been dating for 2 years, and it was kind of getting to that point in the relationship where it was, we're going to move forward with this relationship or not. But you know, a year and a half into us dating is when I began this conversation with selling the business. And so I'm sitting there trying to walk through due diligence, sell this company. At the same time, I'm like, I've got to decide if, you know, I'm going to propose or not. And so I ended up closing on that business in October and proposed to her the 1st of November. And then instead of doing a long engagement, because we're both older, et cetera, and other reasons, but we ended up getting married a week after I proposed, and then we went on a honeymoon. And so there is a verse in the Old Testament that talks about how men were supposed to take a break from war and for a year and invested into their marriage. So that's what I told people I was doing for the first year, as I was taking a break from the war of business, and investing it in my marriage. But yeah, it which is kind of funny, but it was serious. It was great because I did have that time actually to really get to enjoy that new season of life, personally, relationally with her. But it was a whirlwind closing there in October. I proposed to her at a conference I was having to do in Europe, because that trade association is global, and so I was president at that point of the trade association, so I had to be at the events in Asia Pacific, in Europe and South America. So yeah, I proposed to her at the European conference. We came back home and got married, and the week after that I had to go to Latin America for that conference, and we turned it into the conference / honeymoon. Yeah, so there you go. It was one person's experience. Kind of crazy.
So it is getting about the time to officially wrap this up. We want to respect everyone's time. Chad, thank you so much for sharing with us. Like, this was great.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy it.
Basically how we always do it, you know, if you do have to go, now is a good time, but we also still have plenty of food here, and just hang out as someone. Connections are always great. That's kind of why we do that. So, yeah. So officially break and over the ground if you.
Yeah, thank you for hosting.